So we think that it's very hard for any region in the world to have a higher depletion rate than in the North Sea, because that was so economically favorable. So if we now compare the North Sea here, depletion rate, with the depletion rates that International Energy Agency have used in their analysis, you can see there is way, way too high. They will never ever be possible to have these kind of depletion rates in a reality. You can have it in some kind of fantasy model, but when we are interested in reality, it's not possible to have that. So if we take a more realistic numbers and saying that the North Sea, that still is very optimistic, that is our upper border in these predictions. We see we don't get this much oil, we get a much smaller number from the fields yet to be developed. And then you should remember, they are saying that 1,870 fields should be put in production during this time. That is 8 new fields every week for 23 years. That you must believe in if those numbers should be right. Okay, then we have the next fraction, and that is crude oil fields yet to be found. I mean, this is fields we think should be possible to find that has not yet been found. And what do they say here? They say that we should find something like 19 million barrels per day in production by 2030 from fields that we have not yet discovered. And that is 3 times as much as the maximum production for the North Sea that was a region to find. Again, if you look at the future of discovery, we can have an extrapolation of the trends we have had during the last 40 years, and we estimate that during this period it's possible to find something like 121 billion barrels. 114 is the International Energy Agency using, so that's a good number. But if we look now into the production and do the same thing here, take the depletion rate. You see they are using a completely crazy depletion rate. So if you put on a realistic one, we get 9 million barrels instead of 19 million barrels. And if you take the number 114 billion barrels, that is 1.5 times the reserves in the North Sea, and the North Sea peaked at 6 million barrels per day, so 1 times 6 is 9 million barrels, and that is also the number that we get here. So it looks like that is more reliable than the 19 million barrels per day. And then we have these other things here, where the crude oil, additional end of oil recovery, I think that is fine. But then we have the tar sand business, you know. And the tar sand is quite a big chunk of tar to find. That numbers is right, but the industry to get it doing is something completely different. And we have also published a paper that gives another number compared to what International Energy Agency is saying. And then we have the final thing here, and that's natural gas liquid. And even there we find problems with the numbers. So if we sum up everything, we see we had to convert first the natural gas liquid to oil equivalent, because they're using barrels of natural gas liquid, and compare that with oil, and of course you should not do that. So the forecast for International Energy Agency is 101.5 million barrels per day in 2030, and we get 75.8. So that means 25% of the predicted production of oil in 2030 will not be there. So if we add, we get this picture, the International Energy Agency picture, that still is an increase in production, and we show now that no, there will be no increase any longer. We have reached the peak of the oil age, and I'm very sure that that is the reality. So how much can we then get from agriculture? And I will just go through a paper, a starting paper. We have just looked into how much energy is produced in the world, and we have been using all the products, all the 129 different products that agriculture have been produced, and so on, and we see how much energy we get here. And we see that in total, we're using the energy term terawatt hour. We have the total primary production from all food from agriculture give 19,900 terawatt hours. And eatable of that is 17,560. Ineatable is 2,340. And then we have residues, and we get a total number of 38,000. And then we have split it into different regions also. And then we can go through how these things are used. and we get at the end a number that the energy that really is produced at agriculture today is 9,370 terawatt hours. And when we should see and compare how we can use that in the world. Well, then we can also look at the different kinds of products divided into different products. You see here you have maize, wheat, sugar, beet, sugar cane, and so on. And in total we get 5,500 terawatt hours. So this is the interesting thing now to see how the different products can be used here. And you just don't see the picture myself so good just now, but anyway, you see that there is the food demand that we have here. The food demand, so much food we need to have, and then we have other things here later on. So if you now compare with what the consumption of fuel for transportation is, this is the 25,000 terawatt hours. That is the consumption of fuel for the transportation sector. And if you take all the maize that is produced in the world and convert that to ethanol, you get this number. And the ethanol from sugar cane, this is the 2006 numbers, it's higher now. But then they have biodiesel from soybeans, oil palm fuel, and so on, consumption at this year from the biofuel transport sector. And you see, of course, it's a big challenge for the future. And we know that this will go down in the future. So, I mean, there is no question whatsoever that all the ethanol that is needed to be, that can be produced is needed to be produced. And the important thing is that we should not take land that today is used for food production to produce new ethanol. And that's also very important to point out that, because the land used for real food for us to live for is already in demand for that. So what demand can we have in the future when we look into the renewable or other supply of fuel for transportation? There is a coupling between the GDP growth, as you see here, is roughly 3% per year, the blue curve, and the use of oil. There has never ever been an increase in GDP globally without an increase of use of oil. And that is also the driving force for International Energy Agency when they are making their forecast for the future. We must have more oil to have an increase in GDP. And that's why they have their curve with all the fantasy products for the future. And if we now go back in history a couple of years, we see here at the beginning of the century, in 2001 and so on, we had this level of consumption of oil, 77 million barrels per day. Then we have the big increase in GDP around the world, China, India, and everyone, Brazil, had a better life, and we ended up here at the consumption of 85 million barrels per day. But the production stopped here, more or less, the global oil production, and instead we get an increase in the price of oil. And here in July last year, especially China was storing up products from oil because of the Olympic game. And so there was an enormous demand of oil products in July, and we had the spike in the price. Then in August, China didn't need to have more, so it just died down. So this coupling between the oil and GDP growth, you can see very clearly here in China and India. So every % of increase of GDP in China is the same % of increase of use of oil, and you have it also in India. But a region like Sub-Sahara Africa, the poorest countries in the world, you see, they don't have an increase in use of oil, and they stay poor. So Africa should need to use more and more oil to be able to have a growth in the economy. That will not be possible in the future, so ethanol production in Africa is a must for the future for the continent. We are using oil more efficiently in the economy, and this is called the oil intensity. And you see here, by year 1980, Sweden was the most spoiling country when it comes to oil, but we have shaped up now. But still, we are quite using more oil than, for instance, France, Germany, and UK compared with, and of course, United States is the biggest one still. But you see here, it looks to be some bottom line here. These economies in China and India, they are the most efficient when it comes to using oil compared to the GDP. And if we take that as some kind of measure in the future, and we say that all countries in the world should be as efficient as China and India to using oil, so this should be the leading number. I mean, this is efficiency. This is enormous efficiency for all other countries. But let's say this is the goal in 2030. What does that mean in reality? That means that the demand, if we should still have a 3% increase of GDP in the future, the demand of oil should end up here around 100 million barrels per oil. I mean, that is the number the International Energy Agency also is claiming we should have in 2030. But we see there is a peak in the production, and the production will go down. So we will have a demand for alternative fuels for the future is of the order of 20 to 30 million barrels of oil equivalent per day is needed by 2030 if the economy of the world should function in the future. Otherwise, we might have a very big recession for the coming years. So it's a lot of things to do, and we had to work all together to get this solution for the future. So I will go back to Fatih Birol, because he just recently made the following statement: we had to leave oil before it leave us. And that is what we are doing in working here. And this is, I would say, my final slide, or more or less. We are passing a peak, you know, and we must now build a crash mat. And the ethanol industry is part of that crash mat. And we had to build it high, otherwise we will hurt ourselves and falling down. So please keep on working on this crash mat. I will also take the opportunity on behalf of the Swedish Royal Academy of Science in Stockholm. They will in October the 19th and 20th, this in together with when Sweden is chairing the European Union, has this conference, Energy 2050. And they said that they hope that someone that attend this conference will come to Stockholm, because they are sure that it's the world leading experts on energy that will come to this conference. And of course, if the persons that handle out the Nobel Prize in Physics and Chemistry ask people to come and give seminars on a conference about future energy, they are not likely to say no. Okay, thank you very much. And I will end with to show my research group, because a professor is nothing without students. And these are the clever students that are doing all the hard work for me. And if you like to find out more about this, I will say that I will open up on my blog here now, or that a discussion group that should discuss ethanol for the future. And you are welcome to come in there and discuss with me. Thank you very much.
Eu queria agradecer aí a instigante palestra feita pelo professor Aleklett sobre esses dois assuntos, quer dizer, altamente polêmicos, né, que é o fim da era do petróleo por motivos físicos, né, e não por questões de segurança energética ou de meio ambiente, e essa debate permanente do alimento versus a produção de energia, né. Então, eu acho que ele colocou de uma maneira muito apropriada e de uma maneira bastante instigante, volto a repetir, essas duas questões. Eu passaria, então, a palavra agora para o senhor Dr. Michael McAdams.